I was alone in my apartment. I live with 2 friends, but at that moment they weren't home. I was cooking, relaxed, listening to music, just like every other weekend, until something happened that completely chilled me. It's important to note that this isn't the first time I've experienced supernatural events, but usually they are dreams, sleep paralysis, or just feelings of energy. I had never seen anything so clearly, nothing so specific. When I turned to grab something from the fridge, I saw a figure that seemed to be watching me from the living room, and it hid as soon as it realized I had noticed it. It was like someone peeking their head and half of their body around a door or wall, then quickly hiding to avoid being seen. I saw it very clearly. I could make out its silhouette as clearly as I see my friends. In that moment, my blood ran cold. I can't say exactly what it was, but it looked like a woman. At least it had the shape of a woman, even though I couldn't discern her features clearly. At that moment, I made my second mistake. I went into the living room and confronted the presence. I cursed that thing, asking why it was there, declaring that I wouldn't allow its presence and that it should leave my home, among other things, invoking the name of God. After that, I sprinkled holy water around the house because I always keep a little with me. The bedroom was quiet, but the air felt heavy, as if something invisible was present, hovering around me. I was already accustomed to protective rituals, small gestures that repel low vibrational energies, but this time felt different. Perhaps it was the intensity of what I felt, the presence becoming more apparent, more tangible. I continued cooking, trying to ignore the sensation that someone was watching me, that I wasn't alone. The speaker was playing soft music, something that always calmed me. But suddenly the sound started to fade, as if someone else was controlling what I thought was mine. Chills ran down my spine, and I became paralyzed for a moment, feeling the cold air freezing my blood once again. Something was wrong, and this time it felt more than just a fleeting sensation. I tried to compose myself, turn up the music, and carry on with my activities. I repeated the ritual, with prayers and gestures that had helped me before, but nothing happened. As a last resort, I put on my holy rosary, believing it would drive away any bad energy that might be lingering around me. However, while I was busy in the kitchen, I heard a loud noise, followed by something hitting the wall. I looked to the side and saw one of the spoons on the floor. It hadn't just fallen, it was far from where I had left it. It looked like someone had thrown it with great force. The idea that it was a coincidence evaporated. My heart raced, and fear began to seriously overwhelm me. Then, in the midst of my panic, something strange happened. A soft, whispering voice echoed in my head, like a thought that wasn't mine. It said, "You wanted to contact me, and now you're afraid when you feel my presence here." I vaguely recalled something I might have said or wished for, perhaps unconsciously, and I felt an even deeper chill. I had allowed something into my home without noticing. Realizing what had happened, I changed my strategy. Instead of aggressively defending myself, I decided to show respect. I took a deep breath, and in a soft voice, I apologized. I said it wasn't my intention to disturb her, that I understood the message, and that I was already frightened enough. I asked her, if possible, to leave and let me be. I spoke with genuine respect, as if I were in front of someone who deserved my regard. I felt I had to show that I never intended to challenge her, but rather that I sought peace and balance in my home. And at the end of every sentence, I repeated my plea. almost like a quiet prayer, asking her to accept my request. After a few minutes, it seemed that the atmosphere changed. The air, once thick and cold, became lighter, and a strange peace filled the space. Gradually, I felt the presence surrounding me dissipate. There were no more sounds, no more things falling, nor that icy air that had paralyzed me. It was as if she truly understood and accepted my request. A feeling of peace returned, and I felt safer in my own home. Still, what had happened left its marks, and as I write this account, I still shiver at the memory of every detail. There is an important lesson in all of this, and I hope that people reading my account can understand the caution we need to have with what we want, what we say, and even with the thoughts we emit, whether in real life or on social media. We never know what those words or wishes might attract to us. We never know who or what might be on the other side, waiting for an invitation to manifest. My name is Angela, and I hope this story will be told so that others can learn something from it. I send a special greeting to Veronica, who surely knows how fear, when experienced by others, can be food for shadows. To everyone reading, I leave an invitation to share your stories. Each one is important, and here, in this space, you can count on respect and empathy, no matter how incredible the experience may sound. This is a safe place where your story will be welcomed. In the end, we know that there are things that logic cannot explain, and that each person's experience carries a part of the unknown, something that is not always possible to understand, but deserves respect. Now moving on. My name is Lara. I am 15 years old and I live in Florencio Varela, Buenos Aires, in the Ingeniero Allen neighborhood. What I'm about to tell you happened to me and my group of friends. Max, Miguel, Javier and Simon, all older than me. I've been very skeptical since I was little. I never believed in ghosts, witches or anything paranormal. My grandfather, however, loved those topics. He passed away last year, but he often told us stories about witches in a hushed voice, as if he were afraid someone might hear him. He said that witches can hear when they're being talked about, so he always whispered. When I was little, those stories were creepy, but as I grew older, I became convinced they were just made-up tales told to intrigue us. It all seemed like pure fiction until a month ago. It began when my friends and I decided to spend a week at my grandfather's old house. We wanted to do something different before the school year started, and my grandfather's house with its spacious yard seemed like the perfect place. The house was old but full of memories. In its large yard were old trees and a small pond in the middle, where we used to catch frogs as kids. Although none of us were particularly excited about spending the whole week there, we thought it would be nice to reminisce about Grandpa and perhaps have a little fun with his old stories. The first day passed peacefully. We explored the house and settled into our rooms. The air was filled with the scent of old wood, dampness and dust, as if the house had preserved all those years within its walls. I felt a slight nostalgia, but I remained skeptical. I couldn't believe that anything unusual could happen in a place I knew so well. In the evening, we gathered in the living room to watch a movie. The atmosphere was relaxed, although a bit tense since we were in a large, dark house. When the movie ended, we went to our rooms, but then we heard a faint, almost inaudible whisper coming from upstairs for the first time. "It's probably the wind," said Javier. We all nervously laughed and tried to ignore it. On the second day, after breakfast, we decided to explore the yard. The trees were old and imposing, providing shade and a sense of mystery. As we walked around, Max noticed something strange at one of the upstairs windows. It was open, even though none of us had touched it. When we went up to close it, we felt that the air in that room was colder than in the rest of the house. Additionally, there was a smell of smoke, as if someone had burned something there. I looked out the window towards the back of the yard and noticed that the grass was flattened, as if someone had stood there, perhaps watching the house from a distance. That night, the whispers grew clearer, as if they wanted us to understand them, but the words were so soft that we could barely make them out. Simon, who was always very rational, suggested we investigate grandfather's old notes. I wasn't keen on the idea, but curiosity prevailed. We searched his desk, pulling out dusty books and notes. There were drawings of hooded figures, mentions of ancient spells, and notes about 3 witches who, according to him, lived in the nearby woods. Everything was very vague, but reading those pages awakened an uncomfortable feeling in me, as if we should just back off. By the 3rd day, things began to get stranger. During breakfast, Miguel noticed strange scratches on the hallway walls leading to the rooms. The marks looked like deep scratches, which oddly no one remembered seeing before. Max said they might be from animals, but these scratches were too large and too deep. Small footprints were visible on the floor, as if someone or something had stood barefoot in the hallway. While we decided to explore the house that afternoon, including some rooms we hadn't dared to enter before, we found a locked room in the basement. With a little effort, we opened the door and discovered an old, dusty trunk. We opened it and found a collection of strange items. Glass bottles filled with dried herbs, black candles, and an old leather book with yellowed pages filled with symbols and drawings we didn't understand. At the bottom of the trunk, we found a small doll made of twigs and old fabric, with a red thread tied around its neck. Although it all seemed like grandfather's fascination with the supernatural, the atmosphere in the house began to change. It was as if the very presence of those objects had awakened something, and the tension among us became almost palpable. That night, while we were having dinner, we suddenly heard a loud bang at the back door. When we stepped into the yard to see what had caused it, we noticed 3 dark figures at the edge of the property where the yard met the woods. Motionless, they were watching the house. At first, we thought they were people, perhaps passers-by. But one of the figures began to move in a way that looked completely unnatural, as if it were hovering above the ground instead of walking. We tried to approach them, but the figures vanished into thin air, as if we had all experienced a collective hallucination. That night, the whispering did not cease. The voices grew louder, sounding more and more like a choir trying to tell us something. At night, while we lay in the dark, we heard the words repeating, "You shouldn't have come." A cold air filled the house, and thick fog began to appear from the corners of the rooms, as if it were coming from the walls, covering the floor and spreading through the hallway. We retreated into one of the rooms and locked the door, but the walls could not protect us. Fear weighed heavily on our chests. We felt it in every corner of the room. The 5th day was the most terrifying. Javier, the bravest among us, woke up pale and trembling, with deep red marks on his hands and neck, as if invisible claws had attacked him during the night. Horror was evident in his eyes and on his lips. The same phrase kept repeating, "They came for me." We spent the day taking care of him, but it was clear that something unexplainable and dangerous resided in the house. As we were trapped inside, the house came alive, whispering ominous words and reminding us that we had made a terrible mistake. As night fell, every corner of the house emanated a haunting silence. Shadows became more vivid, and the light from our candles seemed weak, powerless against the dark depths of the hallways. Every step and every creak of the floor sounded almost loud, as if the house was warning us to stop. We felt its pulse, like a slow, cold breath passing through the walls and wooden beams. In that silence, eerie and tense, the house was no longer just a building. It felt as if it had its own consciousness, like a being that had finally awakened its slumbering secrets. Our fears intensified when Javier, the bravest among us, experienced something that seemed like a direct warning. His hand froze, our gazes met, and we saw in his eyes something we had not seen until then, unconditional fear. We knew it was no longer a joke, that we were not just victims of suggestion or children's stories. In that moment, it became clear that we had to leave. Our mission to spend a week at Grandpa's house had turned into a race for freedom. That evening, we packed our things in silence while listening for every noise, every creak of the windows, and the tapping of invisible footsteps in the hallways. Every step to the door was laborious, heavy, as if the house wanted to keep us in its web of whispers and cold shadows. When we finally stepped outside, it seemed as if the whispers had ceased, as if the cold air had vanished from the house's threshold, leaving us in the quiet night. When we looked back, the house appeared calm, but beneath that calmness lay a dark threat. It watched us, observing from its dark windows, as if everything we had experienced was just the beginning of something deeper and more sinister. In the safety of the city, gathered under the warm glow of candles, sitting in a circle, we silently exchanged glances, still under the impression of what had happened. It seemed that none of us were capable of breaking the silence, as words were powerless against the feeling we had experienced. We only knew one thing, that we would never return to that house. In that house, in every whisper and cold breath, there was something that transcended our understanding. Those dark figures, cold hands reaching out from the darkness, and the feeling that the house wanted to keep us. All of it was too real. Years later, when the night becomes quiet and the wind blows through the treetops, it sometimes feels like I can hear that same whisper from the house again. And I know deep down that those words, those invisible shadows, will remain a part of me forever, like a dark chapter from which there is no escape. The house may be far away, but its whispers and its secrets remain buried in my memory, like an eternal reminder of what we should never awaken.